So we're going to bring in our last panelist, Megan Bielek from West Virginia as the Women's Basketball Director of Operations. Hi, Megan.
Hi, thank you. Excited to be here.
Oh, thank you for being here. So today we're going to talk about the importance of on-site service. So you have a lot of experience in the operations world for 14 years at least. In your experience, your most recent trip was to Spain with the women's basketball team at West Virginia. What was the highlight of your Spain trip?
The highlight of our trip, we actually traveled. We were in Italy and Greece.
Yes.
Good. And I think for me personally, it was my first year with the team was just to be able to get to know everybody. And this was my first time working with Anthony Travel, and just to see how everything worked was incredible. It made my job so much easier. Between myself, our administration, our SWA traveled with us, and then we had a tour guide and our on-site person from Anthony Travel, Brad, who was fantastic. It was one of the best trips that we've been on. There was constantly support every day. We were always meeting, just kind of going over the itinerary, because the word to describe our trip, we deemed the word fluid. Because of how everything can change and different scenarios pop up. But that was definitely the word of the trip, was fluid. And it was, there wasn't a bad part of the trip.
That as a director of ops, you can't ask for anything more. So like you talked about how Anthony Travel had somebody with you, and then there was the tour operator there in Italy and Greece. We had Richard Polly when the Delaware women's basketball team went to Spain, and I absolutely loved him, as well as our head coach, which, that's always the best thing. What was your experience like with Richard Polly as your tour operator there?
I will never do another tour without Richard. Richard is, and that was told to me by Terry, our SWA, and Coach Carey, like, Richard is the best. We don't go anywhere without Richard, and couldn't agree anymore. He was so on top of it, knew, because he has traveled with West Virginia before, knew coach, knew our administration, knew everybody that was coming on the trip. There was a comfort, a feeling of comfort and understanding of, he knew what we were looking for. He was so important to me because, as I said, everything was fluid. So for us, we did run into some situations where we needed Brad and Richard to help, because during one of our first game, we had a situation where we had to take one of our players to the hospital in Rome. And so I know all about the European healthcare system in Italy. It's fantastic. So both Richard, he accompanied myself and our player in the ambulance to the hospital, and was just so life-saving to be able to help communicate to the doctors and the nurses about what was going on. And our player was fine, not a problem, ran a few tests, everything was good. But just that sense of comfort that he was there. I was fully in his hands, communicating with him and making sure that we stayed in contact with Terry and coach while the game was still going on. It couldn't have been any better. Jim actually happened to have been there with us as well. He was with another school. He popped over. Between him and Brad, everything was taken care of. I mean, it was, stressful, because you're dealing with these players and they're scared because they're not sure what's going to happen. So you're trying to make sure everybody's at ease, and it went as smoothly as possible, because about 3 to 4 days later, we had to make another run to the hospital in Pompeii, and with dehydration, and that's the big thing that I can't stress, is just making sure that the players, continue to hydrate and things like that on these trips, because it is hot, and that is the first thing. Everywhere we went, my eyes were always open, looking for water, making sure, taking care of everybody else. So
Well, at least everybody turned out to be okay. But that's a great example of, in the operations world, not everything's going to go the way you want it to, and you got to be able to react. And it's good that you have that support system to be able to, as you say, have a fluid trip. Then, so when I started Anthony Travel, a comparison that I heard a lot was, Nordstrom versus Walmart for service. What does that kind of statement mean to you?
Huge. I mean, it means the world to be so secure with the fact of how safe and how family. I mean, it was just to the fact of how much we communicated. We still communicate now. Going through the season, Brad, he checked in on how our season was going. We checked in on him. Checked in with Richard and everybody, constantly talking to Darren, and just even on the trip, was talking to Darren, getting things, because things happen. You forget things in the hotel. People, it is what it is. They're kids. And so you're trying to manage everything. And it was just constant communication. There was no really issue, as far as we just kind of went with it, and fluid.
Yeah. fluid. That's going to be in my mind now for any trip I go on, just making sure fluid. So, I asked a couple of the panelists earlier, moving forward when planning a foreign tour, what's the biggest advice you can give somebody while planning a foreign tour?
Knowing, and I think Bianca said it well, was just understanding what your head coach is looking for and what your administration is looking for. And then you can tailor it that way. And I think it's all about, I love the academic aspect that Karen was talking about. I mean, our academic advisor would love to be able to come with us on the next trip. But it's just constant, just planning it and just going over your checklists and making sure going through any scenario, whether it's big or small, something may happen. So you're just constantly thinking about what's going on.
So I have to ask, because you talked about some unfortunate events that happened when you were on your trip. What was the highlight of your trip to Italy and Greece? Not Spain. Karen got me thinking Spain.
I love the Vatican. Previous schools that I went to, I was at the Vatican. I just absolutely spent the day at the Vatican, touring St. Peter's Basilica. Just absolutely loved the whole aspect of that. So that by far was my favorite spot.
What would you have said, when talking to the players afterwards and getting their feedback? What was the highlight of that trip for them?
They enjoyed the food. They enjoyed the food in Italy. A lot of them enjoyed seeing everything. And actually, we had some donors go with us, and they enjoyed just sitting and talking with the donors and getting to know everybody. So I think it was that camaraderie of team building that was big for us.
That's awesome. Well, Megan, thank you so much for your time.